Saligia, as read by the author, Adam Perry.
Saligia, Chapter 5, Avaritia. Surprise was not something Margot Von Ludendorff was especially familiar with. Having spent her life on the winning side of scamming, stealing, profiteering, and swindling nickels out of every hand she ran across, Margot was well equipped to tread the minefields. She had rigged every game she ever played. It came as quite a shock to her 87-year-old mind when she found herself somewhere she had no intention of ever going. Shop Smart. A small group of people around her were walking in at the same time. She felt repulsed by their common clothing and the smell of cheap hair products that drifted out of a salon just past the foyer. She tightened her mink coat around her bony chest to avoid any physical contact with the undesirables. Fluorescent lights had always hurt her eyes. The ones that hung along the ceiling emitted a blinding white light that not only irritated her retinas, but also served to further illuminate her less than glorious surroundings. To her left was a pallet of toilet paper. Another pallet was stacked with boxes of lemon-scented dusting spray, and yet another was piled high with bottles of cooking oil. She felt as if she had been dropped into a storage unit for one of her mansions, and was disgusted. Margot wiped her eyes and momentarily lost sight of where she was walking when she bumped into an old man standing by a buggy. "You okay, ma'am?" the old greeter asked. "Don't touch me," Margot scolded him in her aristocratic New York accent. "Excuse me, madam, but you walked into me." "Do not take that tone with me." She pointed her index finger at the center of his face. "Do you have any idea who I am?" "No, ma'am, I do not. And let me clue you in on another tidbit of information. I don't give a damn who you think you are, but you're going to get your finger out of my face before I rip it off and cram it into your stinking old crotch." "Good gracious!" Margot backed away, stunned that anyone would ever consider speaking to her in such a manner. Insufferable peasant. She brushed the corner of her coat that had touched the old man and walked away as quickly as she could. She heard him call from behind her, "Welcome to Shop Smart." In all her long years, no one had ever dared insult her, at least not to her face. She was a Von Ludendorff, for God's sake, a name which carried with it over a century of wealth, power, and prestige. Obviously, incredible wealth would always have its detractors, but they were mainly tabloid lowlives with no power to do anything but fling mud around their ink-smudged paper. Most of the real media outlets were run through a number of shell companies owned by the Von Ludendorff family, and those little people knew better than to shit where they eat. Still fuming from her encounter with the greeter, Margot wandered the aisles of Shop Smart. Every aisle burst with sellable goods. It grated on her nerves that someone had beaten her to the punch because it was clearly a gold mine of revenue. Cheaply made goods, made by the poor, and sold back to the poor for a hefty profit. She admired the audacity. Even the marketing around the store spoke of Shop Smart as being a friend of the little guy, a partner in the local community, a good neighbor. What a scam! They had even employed the elderly at the door to show the customers just how much Shop Smart cared. Even her late husband Herbert couldn't have devised a better scheme. She laughed to herself as she thought of what Herbert might say if he could witness such a mockery. She had married Herbert in her 40s, and they had made a formidable team. Neither of them dabbled in love, but they knew a profitable partnership when they saw one. Herbert's family, the Denards, had ties going back to the last French monarchy. A desire to squash the peasantry was in his blood, you might say. The running joke between their families was that the French and the Germans had finally decided to stop fighting each other and would just split the world down the middle, though Margot always held the majority share. Shielding her eyes from the lights above, she rounded a corner and found herself staring into the face of an elderly black woman. "Oh," Margot squeaked slightly louder than she had meant. "I didn't see you there." "I saw you," the lady replied with an expression of stony indifference. Not knowing exactly how to respond, Margot stumbled for a second. She had always had a fearful distrust of the Negro. She felt them all to be one provocative altercation from utter savagery. She liked them best when they were kept firmly beneath the grind of her $1,500 shoes, and a long way away from any position where she might be forced to encounter one face to face. "Can I help you with something?" the lady asked Margot, who then realized she had been staring for an uncomfortable length of time. "No, I'm not sure what I'm doing here." "Where'd you come from?" "Manhattan," Margot replied. She was at least sure of that. Fancy place. Fancy place." "Yes, quite," Margot added curtly. Her palms oozed sweat from the anxiety of having never talked to a Negro this long in her life. The woman said, "I went to school there at NYU." "Really?" More sweat leaked into her palms at the thought of an educated Negro. Detestable. "Majored in business. Even opened my own shop until old white people such as yourself decided that I was a stain on their block and bought the whole building out from underneath me. Overnight, I was out on the street. No business, no money, and no home. I had been living upstairs." "Yes, well, I'm terribly sorry for your loss." Margot sidestepped the woman in an attempt to extricate herself from the conversation. "Now I work here. The name is Mammy, and I promise you won't find any fur coats in here." The old black woman flicked the arm of Margot's coat. "Mind your manners, you," Margot retorted. She drew her arm back as if it had come in contact with the plague. "You what?" Mammy asked as she stepped closer. "Come on, say it. There's no one here but us old ladies. Say it." She inched closer to Margot, almost nose to nose. "Say it," she smiled. "Say nigger." Mammy's lips spat the word in her face like a curse. Margot straightened her back to look down her long nose at Mammy. "I most certainly did not say that." "Oh, but you were thinking it. I could see it flash across your beady little eyes." "I have had enough of you," huffed Margot. "I intend to file a formal complaint with your manager." She turned and walked away as fast as her spindly legs would carry her. "Just keep walking," Mammy laughed. "You'll find her sooner or later." Margot made a beeline around the next corner, which took her into children's clothing. To both sides, the clothing racks stretched out for vast distances, further than she could imagine for any floor plan. Surrounding her were boys' T-shirts with Batman logos, pink dresses splattered with all manners of princesses, camouflage shorts with chains that hung from their belt loops, yellow rayon shirts with frogs painted on them, and more in every direction. Margot stopped and turned around when she realized she had lost her bearings entirely. The way she had come into the department was now nothing more than racks and racks of clothing. In the distance, Margot heard a rumble that was growing louder. Racks began to shake and sway as something underneath was rushing past at great speed, something that moved straight towards her. She broke into a mad sprint, swatting away rack after rack of kids' clothes. Behind her, she could hear the violent creaking and snapping of the clothing displays. She yelled with crazed pain as her muscles cramped. Her feet bled with every fall against the hard concrete floor. A growing rumble from behind began to overtake her, a sound like 1,000 voices all screaming in different languages. Children's voices. Her old heart drummed away in her chest as fear wrenched sanity from her like water from a wet rag. She waved her arms in wild arcs, knocking away clothes as she went. But for every shirt she knocked down, 2 more took its place. The horrible noise grew to a deafening roar. The wave of moving clothes was now less than 20 feet away, pushed along by a monstrous surge. Then she saw them, dirty, shabby children running at her with all the speed they could muster. A horrible bloodlust was in their eyes as they shouted rage-imbued gibberish. Margot backed into a clothing display as the children reached her feet. She screamed as her clothing and jewelry were stripped away from her with ferocious rips and tears. They passed her fineries over their heads and shredded them like they were being fed into the grinding gears of a garbage disposal. Finally, when all that was left was her naked body, the children hoisted her above their heads. They passed her around and around. Her body tumbled across an angry sea of children who continually took small-fisted potshots at her wrinkled frame. One of them even grabbed a tuft of her white pubic hair. He tore it from her flesh and held it high like a hard-won trophy. Margot von Ludendorff howled in agony and was finally dumped naked onto the cold tiles of an aisle that separated clothing from computer accessories. The sound of the awful children died away as they retreated back into the depths of the clothing department. She sobbed into her bloody hands, then tried to stand. She made it to her knees when a swift kick to her bottom sent her head first into the tile again. "Oh, it's you again." Mammy stared down at Margot's crumpled form splayed across the tiles. "Looks like you lost that pretty coat. Shame about that." "What is happening here?" Margot whined and curled into a ball. Her arthritic hands held her knees as if her life depended on it. "Well, it's hard to say, but it looks like you're not real popular with kids." Mammy leaned over and extended a hand. "Get up off the floor. We've got somewhere to be." Margot twisted her head up to look at Mammy, who insisted again that she get off the floor. With great reluctance, she took Mammy's hand. One quick yank, and Mammy had jerked Margot from the floor, dislocating her shoulder in the process. "Oh, my arm!" she screamed. Her left arm dangled at her side like beef on a hook. "Stop your bitching," Mammy barked. "You've done nothing but gripe since you got here." Mammy wrapped a flabby arm around Margot's waist and eased her along. Margot all but drug her feet as they went. After a short distance, there was a crackling noise. "What is that?" she asked. "That," Mammy turned her head and winked, "is a party waiting to happen. That's where we're going." As they approached the tall wire fence, Margot could see all manner of yard maintenance equipment. Water hoses, shovels, weed eaters, lawn mowers of all shapes and sizes. She only recognized them because the help used them around her various summer homes. Mammy dragged Margot along into the yard and garden department, where the crackling sound grew louder and was now accompanied by a sputtering noise. "Pick up your feet, damn it!" Mammy barked. "We're almost there." When they made the final corner, Mammy leaned Margot's withered body against a rack of leaf blowers and pointed to a small kiddie pool in the middle of the floor. "You ever swim in one of those things?" asked Mammy, who pointed to the center of the pool, which instead of being filled with water, was filled with boiling oil that periodically popped out in scalding hot droplets. "What in the world?" Margot trailed off. The pool's width stayed the same, but the bottom fell away and the oil darkened. She squinted her eyes as a form rose from the depths. At first, only reddened fingers breached the surface, questing in the air. Then followed a hand, then an arm. A blistered forearm perched itself on the edge of the pool, followed by a second. They exerted themselves until a head and a torso flopped over the side, followed by two legs with flesh like roasted meat falling off two sticks. The tall being stood and shook the oil from its grotesque form. Pus burst from one of the many blisters across its chest. It splattered against the floor with a sickening slap. "My God!" Margot cried. Mammy grabbed her arm and dragged her to stand before the dripping being. Its eyes opened and stared at Margot. "Not God," it shook its head. "Just Herbert." "Herbert!" Margot's mouth fell open as tears streamed from her eyes. She struggled against Mammy's grip but was held fast. "What's the matter?" Mammy smirked. "I thought you'd be happy to see old Crispy." "You let me go!" Margot screamed. "What, no offers of money? Power?" Mammy shook her head. "I'm insulted." Margot did not answer but continued to struggle against Mammy's grip. "I will tell you one thing, Margot von Ludendorff. When you took my life away, I had to take every shit job in the books to pay the bills. I learned a lot of trades, lots of skills. You'd be surprised what a person will do when their student loan payments are more than their salary. I sold drugs, I sold tickets at a nudie booth, and when I couldn't sell anything else, I sold my body. But you know what my favorite job was? She steered Margot closer to the edge of the pool. My favorite was fast food. Yes, ma'am, Mammy said in her best imitation of a southern accent. Mammy smiled into the bloodshot eyes of Margot Von Ludendorff. Since you've been such a good sport, I'll let you in on a little secret. One thing this old nigger learned real well, she pulled Margot close, is how to deep fry white meat. With one quick shove, Mammy sent Margot screaming into the superheated vortex of oil. The liquid blistered Margot's entire body as she was pulled beneath the surface. Her fingers grasped for Herbert only once before she vanished into the depths. Thanks for listening to Saligia. For more information, please follow me on Instagram at Adam Perry Writing or check out the website at adamperrywriting.com.